All right, bring the jury back.
Yes, ma'am. All jurors are present.
All right, defense, you ready to proceed? All right, you may proceed.
He's the nicest kid you could ever meet. Everything about him is awesome. Just awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, but for Adam Matos' love for his son Tristan, none of this would have ever happened, and we would not be here today. I want to talk about subjects that I discussed with all of you, seems like such a long time ago now, during jury selection. First, about the differences between the guilt phase of a trial, which obviously you've already completed, and the penalty phase, which obviously we are in now. During the guilt phase, you were instructed to make factual determinations about whether the state has proven the essential elements of the charge. And you were instructed that if you found A plus B plus C, then you must find D. In other words, if you find that A, the victim is dead, B, the defendant killed the victim, and C, he did it in a premeditated fashion, then you must find him guilty of premeditated murder. There's no discretion in that decision. And your determinations on the elements of the charges had to be unanimous. And in the process of reaching unanimity, it was perfectly to be expected that you may disagree over and that you would argue over the facts. Was this witness credible? Did the state prove this? And if you could not have agreed on any of the elements of the charge, then you would have been hung, and the judge would have declared a mistrial, and another jury down the road would have had to start all over again on the case. Contrast that with the penalty phase that we're in now. The ultimate decision on which is the appropriate punishment, death or life without the possibility of parole, is a moral decision, not a factual decision. It is a moral decision that you are to make individually, based on your individual moral judgment, based on your unique life experience. And nobody expects you to agree with the other jurors in making this moral decision, because it is a decision that you will have to live with the rest of your lives. And no one can tell you what's the right decision to make. Only you can decide the right decision for you to make. And during the penalty phase, there is no such thing as a hung jury. Once any one or more of you decide that life is the appropriate sentence, then you have reached a verdict as a jury, and life will be the sentence. Now, you were all picked because you all said that you could follow the law. And what is the law as it applies to this part of the trial? The law never requires a death penalty verdict. The law is always satisfied with a life sentence. It never requires a death penalty verdict, not in this case, not in any case, not in the worst case you can imagine. The judge has no dog in that fight. She'll be satisfied with whatever decision you make. As Mr. Sarabia made it abundantly clear when he was questioning Adam Matos, they are the ones who want to kill him. Not only is the law satisfied, always, with a life verdict, I would argue that the law favors life. Because before you get to the point where you decide whether death is appropriate, you have to be unanimously convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that the state has proven the aggravators, that the aggravators are sufficient to warrant the death penalty, and that the aggravators outweigh the mitigating circumstances. But each of you individually decide what weight to give to any aggravated or mitigating circumstances. And weighing them against each other is not a mathematical or mechanical process. These are the steps you have to take to even get to the point where the defendant is eligible to be considered for the death penalty. These are the hoops that you have to jump through just to get to the point where you make the final decision, the final moral decision, individually, based on your individual moral judgments. But on the other hand, choosing life is a one-step process. If any of you decide that a mitigating circumstance exists which makes life the appropriate sentence, then you have given that mitigating circumstance the weight of life. And it could be for any reason that you believe makes life the appropriate sentence. It can be simply based on your sense of mercy. And even if you're the only one to decide that, the jury has done its job. You as a jury have made a decision, and the verdict is life. Matos is entitled to have 12 individual verdicts based on 12 individual separate moral judgments. Therefore, I would argue that not only does the law never require the death penalty, it favors life. You were all selected because you said that the death penalty would not be necessarily automatic for someone who's found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. You all said that before making the final determination on the appropriate sentence, you would want to know more. And we talked about what kind of things that you would want to know more about, and you basically said that you'd want to know more about the defendant's background and about circumstances leading up to the murders. And that is what has been shown to you. You got information about Adam Matos' background and the circumstances leading up to the murders. Mitigation is, as I said, any reason to choose life. And it could be based just simply on your sense of mercy. And you don't have to explain yourself to anybody. Agreeing to disagree is perfectly legitimate in the penalty phase of this trial. You were also chosen because each of you said that you can make a moral decision between life and death and not allow yourselves to be unduly influenced by others. Because you said that you would respect the moral decisions of your fellow jurors and expect that they would return the respect and treat your moral decision with respect and dignity. You would not expect 12 strangers to unanimously agree on the moral decisions that you make in your lives, like where to worship, whether to have children, how to raise your children. Again, Adam Matos is entitled to 12 individual verdicts based on 12 unique walks of life. If any one of you decide to choose life, then life is the verdict. You do not have to put up with any intimidation or any bullying in reaching your decision. You do not have to out-debate anybody. You can simply say, I've made up my mind, we're going home. We, as a jury, have reached a verdict because I have made up my mind. And the jury will have done its job. Now, let me talk about the aggravating factors that were presented to you. Previous conviction, prior violent felony. Okay. The plain language would lead one to believe that that refers to something that happened in the past, unrelated to these crimes. But the law allows it to be applied to a situation in which there are multiple victims. So the state has proven that aggravator. It is, of course, up to you to give it weight, if any. Especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. I'm going to repeat the language to you because it's really extreme language. Extremely wicked, shockingly evil, outrageously wicked and vile. Designed to inflict a high degree of pain with utter indifference to or treatment of the suffering of others. The violent killing of another human being, whether by gunshot, knife, or a hammer, is never pretty. It's always ugly. But the kind of crime they're talking about as being especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel is one accompanied by additional facts, additional acts that show that the crime was conscienceless or pitiless and was unnecessarily torturous. As horrific as the murders of Greg Brown, Margaret Brown, Megan Brown, and Nicholas Leonard were, they were not unnecessarily torturous. Greg Brown and Megan Brown died instantly from gunshots. The state has not proven otherwise beyond a reasonable doubt. Nicholas Leonard and Margaret Brown were most likely rendered unconscious by the first blow. Dr. Palma was not able to say whether or not the first blows rendered them unconscious. So the state, therefore, has not proven that they suffered. They have not proven that they were tortured. In no way am I intending to minimize the violence and the bloodshed at Matos wreaked upon the Browns and Mr. Leonard. I'm only saying that the state has failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they were unnecessarily tortured. And the bottom line regarding the aggravators is, if you decide that the state has proven one or more aggravator, and if you decide that they outnumber the mitigators, the mitigating circumstances, and even if you decide that they outweigh the mitigating circumstances, you can still choose life. The process of finding and weighing aggravators versus mitigators is not mechanical or mathematical. And it does not dictate your final decision on whether Adam Matos deserves to die. If you have any doubt about that, I assure you the state would have just objected and Her Honor would have corrected me. When we talk about mitigating circumstances, let me talk about mitigating circumstances that arose during the guilt phase of the trial. You have all found beyond a reasonable doubt that Adam Matos acted in a premeditated fashion, and we respect your decision. You heard the definition of premeditation. There's no time requirement involved. It could be, somebody could develop the intent to kill in a matter of seconds. There just has to be time enough for the person to be able to reflect before carrying out his deed. But one thing is for certain, Adam Matos did not plan to kill anybody. This was a spontaneous act. He could have waited if he were planning on killing somebody, he could have waited for a more opportune time. For example, to when he had a chance to cash his payroll check and he would have some money on him so he could make a getaway. He didn't do that because he had no plan to kill anybody. He could have waited till he had an opportunity to arm himself before going back to the house. He didn't do that. He had no plan to kill anybody. He tossed the rifles into the canal just outside the house. I mean, the diver stepped on the rifle before he even submerged himself in the water. Adam Matos had no plan.
Sir, you're going to object?
Approach. Court reporter ready? All right, you may proceed,
So the objection is overruled.
as long as you're gonna wrap it up.
To remind you, you can find a mitigating circumstance in any of the evidence. And I'm arguing to you that Adam Matos had no intent to go in there and kill anybody when he re-entered the house, that he had no plans to kill anybody. You can use that and find that a mitigating circumstance. Again, he had no plans. He didn't have this planned out. As I said, he just tossed the rifles into the canal. And he tried to bury the bodies next to the house. He had no plan to kill anybody. Furthermore, he did not sneak into the house when he re-entered the house. The state has not presented any evidence that he snuck into the house. So in the absence of evidence, they presented two directly opposing theories. Well, he must have jimmied the lock with a bobby pin. Why? Well, because he did that in the past for the neighbor. If you don't agree to that, then he must have slipped into the garage when Margaret drove home. And then what? Surprised everybody inside? Viciously attacked Margaret in the garage and got the jump on everybody inside. They would have heard the garage door open when she came home. They were expecting her to come home. They were fully clothed. They were awake. He got 20 dogs yapping. He didn't get the jump on anybody. He did not sneak into the house. And he did not re-enter the house to kill anybody. This was a spontaneous crime of passion, not cold-blooded murder. If Adam Matos were evil, if he were a cold-blooded murderer, he had an arsenal inside the house. He could have robbed, shot the pizza guys. He could have robbed and shot the dog people. I mean, he could have shot the police when they came to the door. He snuck out the back with Tristan and got into the canoe. And do I need to go there? He didn't harm the dogs. He didn't harm Tristan. These homicides were not the acts of an evil and wicked and cold-blooded killer. They were crimes of passion.
There's objection to it, proper argument.
Approach.
None of this would have happened if Tristan did not exist. Adam would not have moved down to Florida just to maintain his relationship with Megan Brown. But let's say he would have. He would have moved down in an effort maybe to start a family with her. If Tristan were not involved, and if Megan had grown tired of Adam or had met somebody else, which is perfectly normal in a relationship, there's nothing nefarious about that. There's no reason to believe that Adam would have done anything but withdraw from the situation, move back to Pennsylvania. You heard that he had a lengthy relationship with Megan, off and on. You didn't hear anything about any prior violent acts, the morning of with the knife. You heard about that, of course, but nothing in
Objection, Judge. May we approach?
Approach. That'll be sustained. Move on.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason to believe that Adam Matos would have snapped just at the prospect of losing Megan. To begin to understand why he snapped, you have to begin to understand his relationship to his son Tristan. He agreed to move down to Florida to keep his family together, to be the father to Tristan that he never had. And within 2 months, he's kicked to the curb. Megan Brown no longer wanted to have anything to do with him. And if it were just a matter of losing Megan, he would have simply withdrawn and gone back to Pennsylvania. But much, much more was at stake. I'm going to talk about the witnesses you heard yesterday, because you heard them yesterday. But let me back up. Before I go to the witnesses, let me talk about some other mitigating circumstances that you could find. Adam's courtroom demeanor. You've had 3 weeks to observe him. He's always been calm, attentive, respectful. He hasn't been rolling his eyes or shaking his head or yammering into his attorney's ear. Maybe you saw him cry when the 911 tape was played. Difficult tape to hear from Megan. Maybe you saw him cry when the videos of him and Tristan at the Circle K and the Tampa hotel lobby. He obviously respects authority. He was even polite to Mr. Sarabia when Mr. Sarabia
I apologize for that. You may proceed.
He was even polite to Mr. Sarabia as he was standing over him, taunting him, telling him how he wants to kill him.
Objection, Judge.
Sustained as to taunt. You may proceed.
The witnesses that you heard yesterday were all friends and family members, except for one, Miss Austin, the neighbor. She saw something in him to trust him, and he confirmed her trust by proudly showing up a week or so later with the new bike that she gave him money to buy. The other witnesses, as I said, were friends and family members, and because they testified just yesterday, not weeks ago, I don't feel the need to rehash all the details of their testimony. But what was the composite picture that they created of Adam Matos? Let's talk about his childhood. As you know, he moved a dozen times or so as a young child. He suffered from asthma. He endured some bullying. His mother had a mental illness and was often abused by her boyfriends in front of Adam. Not the worst childhood in the world. Plenty of people have suffered more severely negative childhoods and gone on and not committed crimes. I mean, look at Peter, as the state has said. Look at Peter. Same childhood, different results. Well, for one thing, big difference there. Peter and Adam are half-brothers, so they basically have 2 different gene pools. But more importantly, what did Peter have that Adam did not have? Peter had a father figure. Adam never knew his father. His father was never around. And the value of a positive male role model in a young boy's life can never be understated. But my point is that, not that these childhood events led him to commit these crimes, no. The point is that these childhood events speak of Adam's character. That throughout his childhood, he maintained a positive and cheerful attitude. He was happy and he was fun to be around, even as a young child. What else about this composite picture that these people created for you about Adam? Simply put, he's a nice guy. Of course, they were all his friends and families, but what was the common thread running through their testimony? That he was fun to be around, even as a young child. What they were describing is someone who has a gentle soul. They liked being with him. That he is not the evil and wicked animal that the state would have you believe. And all those witnesses, no one denied that Adam committed these acts. No one tried to make any excuses for him. No one tried to blame anybody else for his actions. And yet they all professed their continuing love and support for him. And what was the most poignant testimony was the testimony of Adriana and Kiara. Kiara's testimony was particularly gut-wrenching. They knew the Browns. They lived with the Browns. They loved the Browns. Yet they came here to testify on behalf of Adam Matos, even though clearly they were still mourning the loss of Greg, Margaret, and Megan Brown. What was the upshot of their testimony? That even though they know what Adam did to people they loved, they still cannot bring themselves to hate him. Because they know him. They know what type of person he is. And that these crimes were completely out of character. Now let's talk about what you heard regarding the circumstances leading up to these homicides. Adam Matos left his friends and family, large group of people up in northern Philadelphia, to move to Florida to be part of a family and to be the loving father he never had. He wasn't just some lonely drifter who had nowhere to go. He had many friends and many family members around him. He had plans for a career. He was going to school. He was commuting to New York. But he tossed all that aside in order to be with Tristan. And that's what I'm saying again, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about Tristan. What did you hear from all of those witnesses? Was that Adam Matos was completely devoted to his son, doting on his son. Go to his friend's house. His friends would be, I forget exactly what circumstances he talked about. Use your memory, not mine. Something about his friends would be downstairs watching sports, and Adam would be upstairs, playing with Tristan. The bottom line is that this composite picture that was presented to you, there is nothing in Adam Matos' past that foretold these crimes. They were spontaneous and isolated acts. And they would have never happened but for Tristan. I want to talk about mercy. The greatest master of the English language, undisputed, lived 400 years ago. His name was William Shakespeare. And there's a reason why his plays, which are often difficult for modern readers, there's a reason why his plays are being staged everywhere in the world, every day, and for the last 400 years. Plays like Macbeth, King Lear, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Othello. I mean, the list goes on and on. Over 38 plays, I think. And the reason why he's as popular now as he was 400 years ago is because the human emotions that he talked about, that he staged, that he presented in his productions, ring as true today as they did 400 years ago. And one of those, the emotions of jealousy, rage, envy, grief, love, revenge, and mercy. And the human emotion of mercy is most famously depicted in his play The Merchant of Venice. And the heroine, the female hero of that play, her name is Portia. And this is what Portia, this is how she described mercy. And if there are any Shakespearean purists amongst you, I apologize ahead of time. This is what Portia said. She said, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It falls like the gentle rain from heaven to the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him who gives and him who takes. It is mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. The king's scepter symbolizes his earthly powers, power which is awesome and majestic, a power which invokes dread and fear in his enemies. But mercy is above that sceptered power, because mercy is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly deeds do most resemble godly deeds when mercy tempers justice." What was Shakespeare talking about? The same thing another man talked about 1,600 years before him, a man named Jesus. Now, Jesus was a preacher. He would travel from village to village spreading God's word. And one day he was in a village, deep in thought, as he often was, and he walked out of the village following a path that led up the side of a mountain, completely oblivious to his surroundings, completely deep in thought. At some point he turns around and sees that his disciples and a large crowd of villagers had been following him. They saw that he was deep in thought. They wanted to know what he was thinking. They wanted to hear him preach. So he obliged them. He sat on this huge rock and delivered what is now called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, he began his sermon as he began all of his sermons. He recited the Lord's Prayer. He warned against judging people. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." He warned against worshiping false prophets. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. But this sermon was different. He talked about something that he hadn't discussed before. In this sermon, he presented what we now call the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are familiar to Christians and non-Christians alike. They are essentially Jesus' recipe for spiritual fulfillment. Jesus preached that in order to achieve spiritual fulfillment, one must embrace values and ideals that transcend the Old Testament, that transcend the strict ideal of justice, represented by the phrase, "an eye for an eye." Jesus felt that and preached that in order to achieve spiritual fulfillment, one needed to embrace emotions, principles such as humility, compassion, forgiveness, humility. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Compassion. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And forgiveness. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Sound familiar? Mercy is twice blessed. It blesses him who gives and him who takes. Why is Adam, Matos, worthy of your mercy? Because, but for his love for Tristan, none of this would have ever happened. Has there ever been created a stronger bond between two human beings than that between a parent and a child? Who can measure the strength of love that a parent has for his or her child, that a father has for his son? Is there anything a parent would not do to save their child? Is there anything more despairing to a parent than the prospect of losing a child? Can a parent ever be put into a more dire situation than that in which he believes he is on the verge of having his child taken away from him, his only child? Is there a limit to what a desperate parent who thinks he is about to lose his only child is capable of doing to prevent that from happening? I submit to you, the only limit is that parent's physical capabilities. And a father who goes to extreme measures to keep his son, even to the point of committing homicide, is not acting out of evilness or wickedness, but rather is acting instinctively, reacting to the despair, the rage, the agony, the jealousy, the torment of losing his only child. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the clothes that Adam Matos will wear for the rest of his life. He will be told what to eat, when to eat. He will be watched when he takes a shower, when he uses the bathroom facilities. The only time he will leave prison will be in a box. The question is, will it be from a call from a higher being or a call from our governor? Together, the 12 of you possess the awesome power of death. But there is a power even more awesome than the power of death. And that's the power of life. And each of you individually hold in your hands the power of life. I stand before you humbly to urge you, as we approach the holiday season, embrace the better angels of your nature and choose life. You'll never regret it.